The rain in New York City doesn't cleanse the streets. It only makes the climb to the top more slippery and dangerous, which Delilah Jones knew better than anyone as she sprinted through the torrential downpour, clutching her leather portfolio to her chest like a shield against the cruel world. Because inside that tube were the architectural designs that would either save her father from eviction or leave them sleeping in a shelter by Friday. She was 5 minutes late for the most important interview of her life at K Group, and the city seemed determined to stop her as a sleek black Maybach swerved around a corner, not slowing down for the puddle that had formed at the curb, sending a tidal wave of oily brown sludge crashing over Delilah, ruining her only white blouse and soaking her sneakers to the bone. She gasped in horror, watching the water drip from her hair onto the pavement. But instead of driving away, the car screeched to a halt and the back door opened, revealing David Kim, a man whose suit cost more than Delilah's entire education, stepping out into the rain with an umbrella already raised by a scrambling bodyguard. He didn't look at her with apology. He looked at her with the cold annoyance of a king whose path had been blocked by a peasant. And without a word, he reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a checkbook, while his dark eyes scanned her ruined outfit with disdain. "If you're looking for a payout, just name the price for the dry cleaning and move," David said, his voice smooth and sharp like polished glass. "I have a meeting in 3 minutes that is worth more than your life history, so don't waste my time." Delilah felt something snap inside her chest, a white-hot spark of rage that burned away the cold rain, because she had spent her whole life being invisible to men like him, men who thought money was a universal silencer. She stepped into his personal space, ignoring the rain plastering her hair to her face, and slapped the checkbook out of his hand, watching it splash into the gutter before she swung her arm back and delivered a ringing slap across his cheek that stopped traffic. "Keep your money and buy some manners with it," she screamed over the thunder. "Your arrogance is uglier than that suit is expensive." For a second, the world stopped as David stood frozen, his hand hovering over his stinging cheek, staring at her, not with anger, but with total shock, because no one had ever dared to touch him, let alone strike him. Delilah didn't wait for the retaliation. She spun on her heel and vanished into the subway entrance, leaving David staring at the empty space where she had been, his heart hammering against his ribs in a rhythm he didn't recognize. He looked down and saw a small silver locket lying in the mud where she had stood. He picked it up, opening it to reveal a faded photo of a young boy, a boy that looked exactly like him 20 years ago. But he shoved it into his pocket, unaware that this small object was about to turn his orderly life into chaotic hell. Entering the K Group headquarters 20 minutes later felt like walking into a fortress of glass and steel, where the air smelled of money and judgment, and Delilah stood in the lobby shivering and wiping mud from her neck, while the receptionist whispered and pointed at the stains spreading across her chest. She approached the desk with her head held high, refusing to let them see her crumble, because she was a fighter, born in the fire of adversity, and she wouldn't let a little mud stop her from becoming an architect. "Deliveries are in the back, honey," the receptionist sneered without looking up. "The lobby is for clients and humans." Delilah slammed her hand on the marble counter, leaning in with a ferocity that made the woman flinch. "My name is Delilah Jones, and I am on the list for the design director," she hissed. "So unless you want to explain to human resources why you blocked a candidate based on a wardrobe malfunction caused by your CEO's car, I suggest you print my visitor badge right now." The receptionist blinked rapidly and typed the name, tossing the plastic badge onto the counter with a scoff. Delilah grabbed it and marched toward the elevators, her adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind a wave of dizziness so intense the floor seemed to tilt sideways because she hadn't eaten since yesterday lunch, saving every penny for her portfolio printing costs. She stepped into the elevator, leaning heavily against the mirrored wall, trying to steady her breathing, not noticing the elegant older woman standing in the corner, watching her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Rough morning, dear?" the woman asked, her voice kind and laced with an accent that sounded like home. Delilah laughed, a dry, brittle sound, closing her eyes for a moment. "You could say that, ma'am," Delilah whispered. "I just ran into the biggest jerk in New York City, and I might have slapped him." The Grandma Kim's eyes lit up with delight, a mischievous smile playing on her lips, because Grandma Kim had been praying for a woman with spirit to enter her grandson's life. "Good," Grandma Kim said. "Some men need a slap to wake up." Just as the elevator dinged for the executive floor, the black spots in Delilah's vision took over, and her knees buckled. She pitched forward, unconscious before she hit the floor. Grandma Kim caught her, shouting for help as Delilah's bag spilled open and the contents scattered across the elevator floor, including a second silver locket identical to the one David had found in the street. Grandma Kim gasped, clutching the necklace to her chest, her eyes widening as she connected the dots incorrectly, assuming the nausea and the heirloom meant only one thing. "Call David," she screamed to her assistant. "Tell him his pregnant wife just fainted in the elevator." Delilah woke up in a room that smelled like lavender and expensive sanitizer, lying in a bed with silk sheets that felt softer than anything she had ever owned, blinking up at the ceiling painted with calming clouds. She tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pushed her back down, and she saw the kind woman from the elevator beaming at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, while a doctor stood by the door looking terrified. "Rest now, child," Grandma Kim cooed. "You have to be careful in your condition." Delilah frowned, confusion clouding her mind as she touched her stomach. "Condition?" she croaked. "Did I miss the interview? I need to get the job or my dad is going to—" The door burst open with a violence that made the flowers on the bedside table tremble, and David stormed in, his face a mask of thunderous fury, still sporting a faint red mark on his cheek from her slap. He froze when he saw Delilah in the bed, looking small and vulnerable, and his grandmother holding her hand like a protective lioness. "Grandma, you called me out of a board meeting saying it was a medical emergency. Who is this? Oh no, it's you." Delilah groaned, recognizing the suit and the arrogance instantly. "Great, the jerk from the street is stalking me now." Grandma Kim stood up and slapped David's arm hard enough to make a sound. "Is that how you speak to the mother of your child?" she demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones, as David and Delilah stared at each other in absolute horror. "Child?" they said in unison. "Don't lie to me, David," Grandma Kim holding up the silver locket. "I found this in her bag, the matching piece to the one I gave you when you were a boy, telling you to give it only to your soulmate, and she fainted from morning sickness, so it is obvious you have been hiding her to protect her from the media." David opened his mouth to deny it, to tell his grandmother that this woman was a stranger who assaulted him, but then his phone buzzed in his pocket with a text from his father, reminding him of the arranged marriage to the cruel heiress of the Park family, a marriage that would ruin his life. David looked at Delilah, who was about to scream the truth, and he made a split-second calculation that was as brilliant as it was diabolical. He sat on the edge of the bed, grabbing Delilah's hand and forcing a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. "You got me, Grandma," he lied smoothly. "We tried to keep it a secret, but yes, she is the one." Delilah tried to yank her hand away, her eyes wide in panic. "Excuse me," she shouted. "I am not—" David leaned in close, his face inches from her, masking his threat as a romantic gesture to his grandmother, but his voice dropped to a terrifying whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Play along," he hissed. "If you expose me now, I will sue you for assault, I will crush your portfolio, and I will make sure you never work in this city again." Delilah froze, the breath trapped in her throat, as she looked at the man who held her future in his manicured hands. She hated him. She hated his money and his arrogance. But she thought of her father sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice, and she knew she had no choice. She swallowed her pride and looked past David to Grandma Kim, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking her face. "Yes," she lied, her voice trembling. "We wanted to surprise you." Grandma Kim clapped her hands in joy, tears streaming down her face as she hugged them both, unaware that she had just locked two enemies in a cage together. Later that night, in the cold, sterile luxury of David's penthouse, he threw a contract on the glass coffee table. "Rule number 1, he said, pacing the room like a predator, "you act like you love me in front of Grandma, but in private, you are nothing to me. Rule number 2, at the office you start as an intern and no one knows who you are. If you fail, you are fired." Delilah picked up the pen, her hands steady now, fueled by a hatred that burned brighter than fear. "Rule number 3, she countered, staring him dead in the eye, "you don't touch me, ever, unless there is an audience." David smirked, leaning back against the window with the city lights framing him like a dark halo. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he sneered. "I prefer women who don't attack me in the street."
They signed the paper, sealing a pact that was built on lies and desperation, but Delilah walked to the guest room, not knowing that the locket in her bag wasn't just a prop, it was the key to a past she had forgotten, and David was the boy she had once sworn to protect. The game had begun, and neither of them realized they were playing for their lives.
Waking up in David's guest room felt less like a fairy tale and more like waking up in a very expensive prison cell where the bars were made of floor-to-ceiling glass and the warden wore Armani. Delilah sat up in the king-size bed, her body aching from the stress of the previous day, and stared at the wardrobe standing open across the room, which was no longer empty but bursting with designer clothes, Chanel blazers, Louboutin heels, and silk blouses, all sent over by Grandma Kim before dawn with a note that read, "For my future granddaughter-in-law, dress like the queen you are." Delilah felt a knot of guilt tighten in her stomach because she wasn't a queen, she was a fraud wrapped in lies and debt, but she didn't have the luxury of conscience right now, not when her father's safety was on the line. She dressed in a sharp navy suit that fit like a second skin, armor for the war she was about to enter, and walked into the living room where David was drinking espresso while reading financial reports on a tablet, looking devastatingly handsome and utterly unapproachable. "Don't get used to the wardrobe," David said without looking up, his voice slicing through the morning silence like a knife. "Grandma wants you to look the part of a fiancé, but remember, at the office, you are nobody." He stood up, tossing a set of keys onto the counter, not for a car, but for the subway. "I won't be seen driving you to work," he added coldly. "Take the train, and if you're 1 minute late, you're fired before you even start." Delilah grabbed the keys, her temper flaring, but she bit her tongue because she knew this was a test. He wanted her to break. He wanted her to quit so he could blame the failed engagement on her. "I don't need your car, and I definitely don't need your charity," she shot back, grabbing an apple from the bowl. "I'll see you at the office, boss." She walked out the door, the heavy click of the lock echoing behind her, signaling the start of her double life, princess by night, pawn by day. K Group's architecture department was a sprawling, open-concept jungle located on the 40th floor, where the air was thin and the egos were inflated to the point of bursting. Delilah stepped off the elevator expecting a professional environment, but what she walked into was a shark tank run by Vanessa Lee, the design director, a woman whose beauty was only matched by her legendary cruelty. Vanessa stood in the center of the room, holding a venti latte like a weapon, scanning the new interns with eyes that looked for weakness. "Listen up, fresh meat," Vanessa announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I don't care where you went to school or what your GPA was. In this office, you are photocopiers, you are coffee runners, and if you are lucky, you might get to sharpen my pencils." Her gaze landed on Delilah and lingered, narrowing slightly as if she sensed a threat she couldn't name. "You," Vanessa pointed a manicured finger, "you look sturdy. Go to the archives in the basement and bring me the blueprints for the Hudson Project from 1998, all 50 boxes." Delilah blinked, realizing this was busy work designed to break her spirit on day one. "Ms. Lee," Delilah said, keeping her voice steady, "I was hired to assist with the Blue Sky draft, not to move boxes." The room went deadly silent as the other interns held their breath, terrified by Delilah's audacity. Vanessa walked over slowly, the click-clack of her heels sounding like a countdown. "You have an attitude," Vanessa whispered, leaning into Delilah's face. "I like breaking girls with attitude. Do it or get out." Delilah looked toward the glass office at the far end of the floor, where she could see David sitting at his desk watching the entire scene. He didn't move, he didn't intervene, he just watched with that same cold, calculating stare, waiting to see if she would crumble. Delilah turned back to Vanessa, smiling, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll get the boxes, but make sure you have room on your desk for them." She wasn't submitting, she was biding her time. 3 hours later, Delilah was covered in dust, her expensive suit smudged with gray streaks as she hauled the final box onto a cart. But as she passed the main conference room, she heard shouting. The team was gathered around a massive digital drafting table where the plans for the new Helix Tower were displayed. Vanessa was presenting to the senior partners, looking flustered while pointing at a complex suspension bridge connecting 2 towers. "The aesthetic is flawless," Vanessa insisted, her voice rising in panic. "It represents the future of New York." Delilah paused outside the glass door, her eyes drawn to the schematic. She wasn't just an intern, she was a prodigy who'd studied structural engineering alongside architecture. And as she looked at the load-bearing calculations for the bridge, her blood ran cold. The math was wrong. Specifically, the wind shear coefficient hadn't been adjusted for the height of the 60th floor. If they built that bridge, it would sway, and in a high windstorm, it would snap, sending the entire structure crashing down onto Fifth Avenue. She knew she should keep walking. She knew she was supposed to be invisible, but she couldn't let a disaster happen. She pushed open the door, ignoring the gasp of the receptionist. "The math is off," she announced, her voice cutting through the argument. Vanessa spun around, her face turning red with rage. "Excuse me? The intern is interrupting a director meeting? Security!" David was there, sitting at the head of the table, spinning a pen in his fingers. He didn't call security. Instead, he leaned forward. "Let her speak," he commanded quietly. Vanessa looked at David in shock, but she couldn't defy the CEO. "Go ahead, embarrass yourself." Delilah walked to the digital board, picking up a stylus. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. "Here," she circled the cable cables, "you calculated the tension for a static load, but at this altitude, with the wind tunnel effect from the neighboring skyscrapers, the vibration will cause resonance frequency failure. Basically, if the wind blows north-northwest at 30 miles per hour, this bridge collapses within 4 minutes. She sketched the correction rapidly, her calculations filling the side of the screen. "You need to add dampener for here and thicken the support truss by 12%. Silence descended on the room, absolute and heavy. The senior engineer, a man with 40 years of experience, stood up and walked to the board, adjusting his glasses. He stared at Delilah's scribbles for a long, agonizing minute while Vanessa smirked, waiting for him to tear the intern apart. "She's right," the engineer muttered. "My God, she's absolutely right. We missed the resonance factor." The room exploded into murmurs. David looked at Delilah, and for the first time since they met, there was no annoyance in his eyes, only a flicker of genuine respect, mixed with danger. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Vanessa," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you were about to approve a design that would have killed people and cost me billions." Vanessa paled, stammering excuses, but David held up a hand. "The intern just did your job. Fix it now." He walked past Delilah, and as he did, he leaned in so only she could hear. "Not bad for a fake wife," he whispered, "but don't think this makes us friends." Delilah walked out of the conference room feeling 10 feet tall, her heart racing with the thrill of victory, but she had made a dangerous mistake. She had humiliated Vanessa in front of the CEO, and a viper doesn't strike when you're looking. It waits until your back is turned. Vanessa watched Delilah leave, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure malice. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "I need a background check on the new girl, Delilah Jones. Dig deep, find the dirt, find the debt, find everything. I want her destroyed." Meanwhile, Delilah retreated to the break room, shaking from the adrenaline rush, reaching for her phone to call her dad and tell him the good news that she was making progress, but the screen lit up with a text message that made her blood freeze in her veins. It wasn't from her dad. It was a grainy picture taken through a window of her father tied to a chair with a man standing over him holding a baseball bat. The caption read, "50,000 by midnight or we break his legs. Your rich boyfriend hasn't paid us yet." Delilah dropped the coffee cup. It shattered on the floor, spilling dark liquid everywhere. She realized with horror that David hadn't paid the debt. He had lied, or worse, he was waiting. She ran to the elevator, jamming the button for the top floor, her mind screaming one name, David. She stormed into his office, ignoring his secretary, bursting through the double doors just as David was pouring a drink. "You lied to me," she screamed, throwing her phone onto his desk so hard it slid across the mahogany surface. "They have my father." David looked at the phone, then at her, his expression unreadable. "I said I would pay them when you proved your worth," David said calmly, taking a sip of scotch. "You did good today, Delilah, but you are still a liability." Delilah felt the rage overtake her fear. She grabbed his lapels, pulling him down to her level, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "This isn't a game, David," she yelled. "My father is going to die. If you don't transfer that money right now, I will walk out of here, go straight to Grandma Kim, and tell her everything. I will tell her the baby is a lie, I will tell her the marriage is a scam, and I will tell her her grandson is a heartless monster who let a man die for leverage." David stared at her, searching her face for a bluff, but he saw only raw desperation and a fire that matched his own. The air between them crackled with tension so thick it felt like static electricity. He reached for his phone, his eyes never leaving hers. "Fine," he said, "but this debt just bought you a lifetime of service." He pressed the button. "Transfer the funds," he ordered into the phone.
Delilah slumped back, relief washing over her, but as she looked at David, she realized something terrifying. She hated him, but she was now owned by him. "But that was only the beginning," David said softly, putting the phone down, "because now that I've paid for you, you belong to me completely."
The atmosphere inside David's Maybach was colder than a morgue as the car sliced through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, heading toward the Kim family estate in the Hamptons. Delilah sat pressed against the leather door as far away from David as physically possible, her heart still hammering from the confrontation in his office, where he had saved her father but claimed her soul in the process. She looked at him out of the corner of her eye, watching him type furiously on his phone, his profile sharp and unyielding like a statue carved from ice. "Grandma's throwing an engagement dinner tonight," David said, suddenly shattering the silence without looking up. "The entire board of directors will be there, along with the Park family, who are looking for any excuse to destroy us. So let me be clear, Delilah, you are not an intern tonight. You are the future mistress of K Group, and if you slip up, if you use the wrong fork or say the wrong thing, they will eat you alive." Delilah turned to face him, her jaw set. "I know how to eat dinner, David," she snapped. "I might be poor, but I'm not a savage." David finally looked at her, his eyes sweeping over her office wear with critical disdain. "You're wearing polyester," he noted dryly. "In that room, polyester is a crime punishable by social exile." He tapped on the partition glass. "Driver, stop at the boutique on 5th. We need to armor the soldier before sending her into battle." Delilah hated him. She hated how he looked at her like a project to be managed. But as the car slowed, she realized that for tonight she didn't just have to survive the elite, she had to become one of them. The boutique was a cathedral of fashion, where the air smelled of lilies and old money, and the assistants moved like silent ghosts, obeying David's subtle hand gestures. He sat on a velvet sofa, sipping sparkling water, while Delilah was shoved into a changing room with a dress that cost more than her father's life insurance policy. It was a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk, backless and dangerous, designed to cling to every curve like a second skin. When she stepped out, the room went quiet. Delilah looked at herself in the three-way mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked powerful. She looked wealthy. She looked like she belonged. She turned to face David, expecting a snide comment or a critique, but he had stopped drinking his water. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening imperceptibly as he took her in. For a second, just a fleeting second, the mask of the ruthless CEO slipped, and Delilah saw a flash of raw hunger that made her breath hitch in her throat. He stood up, walking slowly toward her, circling her like a predator inspecting a prize. He reached out, his fingers brushing the bare skin of her shoulder to adjust a strap, sending a jolt of electricity through her that made her knees weak. "Adequate," David whispered, his voice rougher than usual. "You look passable." He pulled away quickly, clearing his throat and checking his watch. "Let's go," he commanded. "Don't let the dress wear you, Delilah. You wear the dress." She followed him out, her skin still burning where he had touched her, realizing with terrifying clarity that the most dangerous thing about this night wasn't the sharks at the dinner table, it was the man holding her arm. The Kim estate was a fortress of limestone and ivy, looming over the ocean like a sentinel. The dining room was set for 20 people, with crystal chandeliers that cast a fractured light over the guests, who were a collection of New York's most powerful and predatory figures. Grandma Kim sat at the head of the table, looking like an empress, beaming when David and Delilah walked in hand. "My beautiful children," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. "Come, sit. Everyone has been dying to meet the woman who finally tamed my grandson." Delilah forced a smile, squeezing David's hand tight enough to cut off circulation as they took their seats. Across the table sat Vanessa Lee, looking like a venomous snake in a red dress, her eyes tracking Delilah's every move. Next to Vanessa was an older man with a cruel face, Mr. Park, the father of the jilted heiress. "So," Mr. Park drawled, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is the mystery woman. Quite a surprise, David, considering her background." He gestured vaguely at Delilah, as if her poverty was a visible stain on the silk dress. "Tell us, my dear," Mr. Park continued, "where did you study? The Sorbonne, Yale, or perhaps somewhere more local?" The table went silent, waiting for the humiliation. David stiffened, preparing to intervene, but Delilah placed a calming hand on his arm. She looked Mr. Park dead in the eye. "I studied at the School of Architecture at City College, where we learned that a building's strength comes from its foundation, not its decoration. Just like people, Mr. Park, pedigree is just decoration. Character is the foundation." Grandma Kim let out a loud, delighted laugh, while Mr. Park's face turned a shade of purple usually reserved for bruised fruit. "Well said," Grandma Kim cheered. "I love her." Vanessa wasn't finished. She signaled the sommelier, who poured a dark, rich red wine into Delilah's glass. Vanessa swirled her own glass, smiling a smile that promised violence. "Speaking of character," Vanessa purred, "this is a 1982 Chateau Margaux, one of David's favorites. Surely a woman of your refined taste can tell us about the notes, or do you prefer beer?" It was a classic trap, designed to expose Delilah as uncultured trash. The table leaned in. David's jaw clenched. He knew Delilah couldn't possibly know about vintage French wines. He opened his mouth to deflect, but Delilah picked up the glass. She didn't drink, she just inhaled, closing her eyes. The scent triggered a memory from her childhood, before the deaths, when her father worked as a head waiter at the plaza and would sneak home samples, teaching her to smell the world. "It's interesting," she said softly, opening her eyes, "because the label says 1982 Margaux, which should smell of black currant and violets with a hint of truffle." She tilted the glass, looking at the sediment. "But this smells of cork taint and chemically aged oak." She set the glass down gently. "I believe this bottle was stored improperly, or it's a counterfeit. I wouldn't drink it, Mr. Park. It might give you a headache." The sommelier turned pale, snatching the bottle to check the cork. "My God," he whispered, "she's right. The cork is compromised." The table erupted in whispers, not of mockery, but of awe. Vanessa looked like she had swallowed a lemon. David looked at Delilah with a mixture of shock and pride, realizing he had underestimated his fake wife yet again. Under the table he found her hand and laced his fingers through hers, giving a squeeze that felt startlingly real. "You're full of surprises," David murmured into her ear. "I told you, I have a good nose for rot." Needing to escape the intensity of the dinner, Delilah slipped away to the terrace overlooking the crashing waves. The moon was full, casting a silver path on the water. She leaned against the stone railing, trying to slow her breathing, when she heard footsteps. It was David. He didn't say anything, just stood there next to her, staring out at the ocean. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was charged with a magnetic tension that pulled them together. "You were impressive tonight," David admitted quietly. "You handled Park and Vanessa better than I would have." Delilah laughed, a bitter sound. "I've dealt with bullies my whole life, David. Rich bullies are no different. They just wear better shoes." David turned to face her, studying her profile in the moonlight. "Why didn't you tell me," he asked quietly, "about the debts, about how bad it was?" Delilah shrugged, pulling her shawl tighter. "Because people like you don't understand survival. People like you solve problems with checks. I solve them with grit." David reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "Maybe," he whispered, "maybe I want to understand." He brushed a stray curl from her forehead, and his thumb grazed a small, faint scar above her eyebrow. He froze, his eyes locked onto the scar. A memory flashed in his mind. Fire, smoke, a little girl dragging a boy to safety, a piece of falling debris cutting her forehead. "Where did you get this?" David demanded, his voice urgent. "This scar, Delilah, where did you get it?" Delilah pulled back, confused by his intensity. "I don't know," she said. "I've had it since I was a kid, a playground accident, I think. Why?" David stared at her, his heart pounding. It couldn't be. The girl from the fire was gone. She had disappeared years ago. But the locket, the scar, the attitude... "Nothing," David said, stepping back, his mask slamming back into place. "Let's go inside. Grandma's waiting." He walked away fast, leaving Delilah alone on the balcony, wondering why he looked as if he had seen a ghost. Inside the house, Vanessa was in the library, furiously typing on her phone. The background check she had ordered had come back with something better than debt. It was a police report from 6 months ago, a shoplifting charge that had been dropped. It was a misunderstanding involving Delilah's senile aunt, but on paper it looked like theft. Vanessa smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. She looked at the expensive diamond bracelet sitting on the side table, a gift Grandma Kim had left out for Delilah.
Vanessa picked up the bracelet and slipped it into her pocket. "Let's see how the architectural prodigy handles a felony," Vanessa whispered to the empty room. She walked back toward the party, ready to execute the final phase of her plan. She bumped into a waiter dropping a napkin. "Oh, excuse me," she said loudly. "Has anyone seen Grandma Kim's diamond bracelet? It was right here a moment ago." The music stopped. The chatter died. All eyes turned to the table where the bracelet was missing. And then all eyes turned to Delilah, who was just walking back in from the terrace, looking guilty of nothing but surviving. "Search the bags," Mr. Park suggested with a sneer. "Start with the one who needed a payout this morning." David looked at Delilah and then at Vanessa, and he knew instantly that the game had turned deadly. "No one touches her," David growled, stepping in front of Delilah. But it was too late. Grandma Kim was looking at Delilah with fear in her eyes. "Delilah?" Grandma asked softly. "You did you?" The trap was sprung, and this time Delilah wasn't sure if she could talk her way out of it.
The silence in the dining room was heavy enough to crush bones as 20 pairs of eyes locked onto Delilah, weighing her worth against a missing piece of carbon. "Search her bag," Mr. Park demanded again, his voice gleeful with the prospect of destruction. "If she has nothing to hide, she won't mind." Delilah stood frozen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, not because she was guilty, but because she knew how this looked. She was the outsider, the charity case, the girl with the depths. David stepped in front of her, his body a solid wall of expensive wool and suppressed rage. "I said no," David growled. "This is an insult to my fiancée and an insult to me." But Delilah placed a hand on his shoulder, moving him aside gently, because she knew that refusal looked like guilt, and she had too much pride to hide behind a man. "It's fine, David," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but clear. "Let them look. I have nothing to steal." She handed her small clutch to the head of security, who emptied it onto the white tablecloth. Lipstick, a phone, a packet of mints, and then with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot, the diamond bracelet slid out from the lining. The room gasped. Grandma Kim covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of betrayal. "Delilah," Grandma whispered brokenly, "why?" Delilah stared at the jewelry sparkling innocently on the table, her mind spinning because she had never touched it. She had never even been near it. "I didn't," she stammered, looking at Vanessa, who was wearing a mask of mock sympathy that barely concealed her smirk. "I swear I didn't put that there." Vanessa stepped forward, shaking her head. "Oh, sweetie," Vanessa cooed. "Desperation makes us do crazy things, doesn't it? Don't worry, we won't call the police. Just leave." The shame was a physical heat burning Delilah's face. She turned to run, to escape the judgment, but David grabbed her wrist, his grip iron hard. He didn't look at her. He looked at the bracelet, and then he looked at Vanessa, and in that second he saw the trap for what it was. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that confused the room. "You all have terrible imaginations," David said, picking up the bracelet and sliding it onto Delilah's wrist, snapping the clasp shut. "You didn't steal this, Delilah," he announced, his voice projecting authority to every corner of the room. "I put it in your bag." The guests murmured in confusion. Vanessa's smirk faltered. "David?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" David turned to the table, his eyes cold and challenging. "I put it there as a surprise for later," he lied smoothly. "I wanted her to find it when we got home. Clearly my timing was off. And clearly," he glared at Mr. Park, "some of you are too eager to accuse the future matriarch of K Group." He pulled Delilah close, kissing her temple, a gesture that looked tender but was actually him staking his claim. "Let's go, darling," David said. "The air in here is stale." He walked her out, head held high, leaving the sharks circling nothing but empty water. As they reached the foyer, Vanessa tried to intercept them. "David, surely you don't expect us to believe—" David stopped, turning on her with a ferocity that made her take a step back. He didn't shout. He whispered, and it was terrifying. "I know you planted it, Vanessa. I know you bribed the waiter, and I know you hate her. But listen to me very carefully. If you ever try to frame my wife again, I won't fire you. I will dismantle your entire life. I will make sure you can't get a job sweeping floors in this city." Vanessa went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. David turned to Delilah, who was staring at him in shock. "Get in the car," he ordered softly. As the door closed, shutting out the world, Delilah finally exhaled. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you lie for me? You could have let them destroy me. It would have been an easy way out of the contract." David looked out the window, watching the city lights blur. "Because you are mine," he said simply, "and no one attacks what is mine." It wasn't a declaration of love, it was a declaration of possession, but for the first time in Delilah's life, Delilah felt safe. Safety was an illusion that shattered with the sunrise. Delilah woke up to the sound of David shouting on the phone. She walked into the living room, finding him pacing, his tie undone, his hair messy. "I don't care who leaked it. Kill the story," he yelled, slamming the phone down. He looked at Delilah, his eyes weary. Someone at the party talked. The tabloids are running with Cinderella the thief. Our stock dropped 4 points this morning. Delilah felt the weight of guilt crash down on her. "I'll issue a statement," she said. "I'll tell them—" "They don't care about the truth, Delilah. They care about blood." He walked over to her, grabbing her shoulders. "The board wants me to fire you from the project. They want you gone." Delilah stiffened. "And are you going to?" she asked, expecting the worst. "No," David said fiercely. "We are going to the construction site today, the Helix Tower groundbreaking. If you want to silence them, prove you are indispensable. Prove you are the architect I know you are." It was a challenge and an invitation. Delilah nodded, her fear replaced by determination. "Let's go build a skyscraper," she said. The construction site was a chaotic symphony of jackhammers and shouting men. Delilah walked through the mud in her hard hat, looking at the skeleton of the building that would define the skyline. She felt at home here, among the steel and dust, more than she ever did in the ballroom. She spotted a foreman arguing with a crane operator and marched over, unfolding her blueprints. "That load is too heavy for the wet concrete on Sector 4. You need to divert to the south pillar or the foundation will crack." The foreman, a burly man named Mike, looked down at her, sneering. "Who are you, girlie, the coffee runner?" Delilah grabbed his walkie-talkie. "I'm the woman who knows that if you drop that steel beam, you'll cause a catastrophic structural failure that will bury us all. Divert the crane now." Mike hesitated, looking at David, who was watching from the scaffolding. David nodded once. Mike swore but gave the order. The crane swung the massive beam away just as the concrete on Sector 4 groaned and shifted, settling dangerously. If the beam had been there, it would have been a disaster. "Good call," Mike grunted, looking at Delilah with new respect. She smiled, feeling the thrill of competence. But she didn't see the shadow moving on the upper gantry, someone wearing a K-Group uniform but moving with the stealth of a saboteur. David was walking toward her, smiling, a genuine smile that made him look 10 years younger. "You saved the foundation," he called out. "Maybe I should give you a raise." Delilah laughed, walking toward him. "I'll take it in cash," she joked. Suddenly, a metallic screech tore through the air. Delilah looked up and saw a massive pallet of bricks swinging wildly on a loose cable directly over David's head. The saboteur had cut the line. "David, move!" she screamed, but the noise of the machinery drowned her out. He looked at her, confused. The cable snapped. Time moved in slow motion. Delilah didn't think, she didn't calculate, she just reacted. She sprinted across the uneven ground, diving at David with the force of a linebacker, tackling him out of the way just as the pallet smashed into the earth where he had been standing, exploding in a cloud of dust and deadly shrapnel. They rolled together in the dirt, David protecting her head, Delilah clutching his coat. As the dust settled, David looked down at her, his face covered in gray powder, his heart pounding like a drum. He was alive. She had saved him. But as he looked at her forehead, he saw it again, the old scar, now red and angry from the impact. And around her neck, the silver locket had spilled out of her shirt. It dangled between them, swinging like a pendulum. David's eyes went wide, his breath stopping in his chest. The fire! The girl who dragged him out! The locket! "It's you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It was you the whole time." But before he could kiss her or scream at her, a second cable snapped above them, and the entire scaffolding groaned, ready to come down on top of them. The sabotage wasn't over. It was an assassination attempt. The world dissolved into a terrifying cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass as the second support cable snapped, sending the steel scaffolding cascading down like a metallic waterfall aimed directly at their heads.
David didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his billion-dollar empire or the board meeting or the lies. He pulled Delilah tight against his chest, curling his body over hers to form a human shield, just as the first steel beam slammed into the earth inches from his spine, sending a shockwave through his bones that knocked the breath out of him. Dust choked the air, turning the bright afternoon into a suffocating gray twilight, while debris rained down, pinging off his back like hail. Delilah was screaming his name, her hands clutching his shirt, her face buried in his neck, feeling the rapid, terrified beating of his heart against hers. For 10 agonizing seconds they were buried in the dark, the sound of destruction roaring around them, until silence finally fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant shouting of the construction crew. David lifted his head, coughing up dust, blood trickling from a cut on his temple, running down his cheek to mix with the grime. He looked down at Delilah, frantically scanning her for injuries, his eyes wide with a desperation she had never seen before. "Are you hurt?" he rasped, his voice raw. "Did it touch you?" Delilah shook her head, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You're bleeding," she whispered, reaching up to touch his wound. He grabbed her hand, pressing it to his cheek, his gaze intense and burning. "I don't care," he said fiercely. "I promised I'd protect you this time." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, because he wasn't talking about the scaffolding. He was talking about the fire from 20 years ago, the memory that had finally unlocked in his mind. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and flashing lights, but David refused to let go of Delilah's hand, even as the paramedics tried to strap him onto the gurney, forcing them to let her sit by his side. At the hospital, while doctors stitched the wound on his head, David lay watching her, his mind replaying the past, overlaying the image of the brave little girl who dragged him from the burning orphanage with the fierce woman sitting next to him now. It was the same fire, the same spirit, the same scar. He had treated her like trash. He had humiliated her. He had used her as a pawn, and she was the only person in the world who had ever truly saved him. The guilt tasted like ash in his mouth. His assistant, James, burst into the room, holding a tablet, his face pale. "Sir," James panted, "we reviewed the site security footage. It wasn't an accident. Someone used bolt cutters on the primary cable." David took the tablet, his eyes hardening into chips of obsidian as he watched a figure in a hooded K-Group uniform sabotage the rig. He zoomed in on the wrist, a distinct red watch visible under the cuff. He knew that watch. It belonged to Mr. Park's personal driver. A cold, deadly rage settled over David, calm and terrifying. They hadn't just tried to stop a building, they had tried to kill him, and worse, they had almost killed Delilah. "James," David said, his voice devoid of emotion, "initiate the scorched earth protocol. Freeze the Park assets, call the creditors, and leak the photos of Mr. Park's offshore accounts. I want him bankrupt by morning." James nodded and ran out. Delilah watched him, afraid of the darkness she saw in his eyes. "David," she whispered, "what are you going to do?" He looked at her, the darkness vanishing, instantly replaced by a pained tenderness. "I'm going to finish this, but first you need to leave." Delilah blinked, confused. "Leave?" she asked. "I'm not leaving you. You're hurt." David sat up, ignoring the protest of his muscles and the doctor's orders, grabbing her shoulders. "You don't understand, Delilah. This isn't corporate sabotage anymore. This is an assassination attempt," he said, his voice urgent. "As long as you are with me, you are a target. I can't let you get hurt again." He reached into the drawer, pulling out a checkbook, the same one he had tried to use the day they met. He scribbled a number, $5 million, and tore it out, shoving it into her hand. "Take this. It covers your father's debt and enough to start your own firm. Go to Paris. Go to London. Just get away from me." Delilah looked at the check, then at him, her heart breaking because she realized he was pushing her away to save her, just like he did in the fire years ago. She stood up slowly, crumpling the check in her fist. "You think you can buy me off?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You think because things got real, you can just pay me to disappear?" She threw the crumpled paper at his chest.
"I didn't sign that contract for money, David. I signed it to save my family, and right now, whether you like it or not, you are my family." David stared at her, stunned by her loyalty, stunned that after everything he had done, she still chose to stand in the line of fire for him. He pulled her down, crashing his lips against hers in a kiss that wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, a kiss that tasted of blood and dust and unspoken love. For a moment, the world fell away, and there was only the heat of their bodies and the realization that they were inextricably bound. Across town, in a dimly lit office, Vanessa paced nervously while Mr. Park poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. "The attempt failed," hissed Vanessa. "He's alive and he knows." Mr. Park slammed the glass down, shattering it. "Of course he knows. David Kim is a wolf. He will come for our throats. We have to strike first before he bankrupts us." Vanessa looked at the phone, seeing the news report that David was in the hospital. A wicked idea formed in her mind. "He has a weakness now," Vanessa said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "The girl." Mr. Park looked up. "The fake wife? She's nobody." "To him she is everything," Vanessa corrected. "I saw how he looked at her at the dinner. I saw him dive in front of those bricks. She is the chink in his armor. If we take her, we control him." Mr. Park nodded slowly, desperation making him dangerous. "Do it," he commanded. "Grab her tonight, use her as leverage to get him to sign over the company shares, and then get rid of her." They didn't know that David was already bankrupting them. They only knew they had one card left to play, and it was a violent one. Delilah left the hospital room to get coffee, giving David a moment to rest. The hallway was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming. She walked to the vending machine, her mind racing with the kiss, with the realization that she had fallen in love with the man she was supposed to hate. She inserted $1, pressing the button for black coffee. Behind her, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A heavy hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream as a needle pricked her neck. The world spun into darkness instantly. Her phone dropped to the floor, sliding under the machine. Back in the room, David felt a sudden chill, a distinct feeling of wrongness. "Delilah?" he called out. Silence. He ripped the IV out of his arm, blood dripping onto the sheets, and stumbled to the door. "Delilah!" He found her shoe in the hallway. Just one sneaker left behind, like a modern Cinderella. Panic clawed at his throat, raw and primal. His phone buzzed. It was a video call from an unknown number. He answered it, his hand shaking. On the screen, tied to a chair in a warehouse with a gun pressed to her temple, was Delilah, unconscious. Vanessa's voice was off camera, distorted and mocking. "Hello, David," she said. "If you want your little architect to design anything ever again, bring the transfer deeds to K Group alone. No police, or she becomes part of the foundation." David stared at the screen, his face turning into a mask of pure lethal intent. He didn't scream, he didn't bargain. He went deadly quiet. "If you touch one hair on her head," David whispered to the screen, "I will burn this entire city down with you inside it." He hung up and walked to the closet, pulling out not a suit, but a black tactical vest he kept for emergencies. David Kim, the CEO, was dead. The boy who survived the fire had returned, and he was coming for blood.
The abandoned shipyard on the edge of the Hudson River smelled of rust and rotting seaweed, a graveyard of industry where the fog clung low to the ground, masking the approach of the predator. David stepped out of his car, not into the light, but into the shadows, his tactical vest hidden beneath a heavy trench coat, his face a mask of stone that betrayed no fear, only a terrifying inevitability. He walked toward the main warehouse where a single flickering light bulb swung above the entrance, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. Inside, Delilah was tied to a steel chair in the center of the vast, empty space, her head throbbing from the drug, her wrists raw from struggling against the zip ties. Vanessa stood behind her, pressing the cold muzzle of a pistol against Delilah's temple, while Mr. Park paced back and forth, sweating profusely, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. "He's late," Mr. Park muttered. "He's not coming. He abandoned her." Delilah lifted her head groggily, spitting blood from a cut on her lip. "He'll come," she rasped, her voice weak but defiant, "and when he does, you'll wish you were dead." Vanessa laughed, a high-pitched sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Love makes men weak, little architect," Vanessa sneered, tightening her grip on the gun. "He'll sign the company over, and then I'll put a bullet in you just to watch him break." The heavy iron doors groaned open. David stood there, silhouetted against the moonlight, alone, unarmed, holding a simple manila folder. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock, stopping 10 feet away. "I'm here," David said, his voice calm, deadly quiet. "Let her go." Mr. Park rushed forward, snatching the folder from David's hands, his greed making him careless. "The transfer deeds?" Park demanded, tearing it open. "Did you sign them?" David watched him, his eyes never leaving Vanessa's finger on the trigger. "Read it," David commanded. Mr. Park pulled out the papers and froze, his face draining of all color as he read the header. It wasn't a transfer of ownership, it was a foreclosure notice. "What is this?" Park screamed, shaking the papers. "This says my assets are frozen. This says I'm bankrupt." David smirked, a cold, cruel expression that sent shivers down Delilah's spine. "While you were playing gangster, I was on the phone with the Global Banking Commission," David explained smoothly. "I bought your debt, Park. All of it. Every loan, every mortgage, every credit line. I own you. And 10 minutes ago, I called in the debt. You are penniless. You can't even afford the bullet in that gun." Vanessa's hand shook, the reality of their failure crashing down on her. "You're lying," she shrieked. "Kill her! Kill her now!" She pressed the gun harder against Delilah's head, her finger tightening on the trigger. David moved, but Delilah moved first. Seeing Vanessa's distraction as she screamed at David, Delilah threw her weight backwards, slamming the metal chair hard into Vanessa's shins. The bone cracked with a sickening sound, and Vanessa howled, stumbling back, the gun firing wildly into the ceiling. David crossed the distance in a blur of motion. He didn't fight like a CEO, he fought like a man possessed. He caught Mr. Park's swinging fist and snapped the man's arm with a precise, brutal twist, shoving him into a pile of crates. Vanessa scrambled for the loose gun on the floor, screaming in pain, but Delilah had managed to tip her chair over, rolling sideways to kick the weapon away into the dark. David reached Vanessa, lifting her by the collar, his eyes burning with a dark fire. "I told you," David whispered into her terrified face. "If you touched her, I would burn your world down." He threw her aside like a rag doll just as sirens began to wail in the distance, blue and red lights flooding through the high windows. The police burst in, weapons drawn, shouting commands, but David didn't look at them. He knelt beside Delilah, pulling a knife from his boot to slice the zip ties. As her hands came free, she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his coat, sobbing with relief. David held her tighter than he had ever held anything, rocking her gently in the chaos. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you, little star." 2 days later, the hospital room was quiet, filled with the scent of lilies and the hum of the city outside the window. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, watching David pack his bag. He had refused to leave her side until the doctors cleared her. "Little star," Delilah said softly, breaking the silence. "You called me that at the warehouse. Why?" David stopped, his back to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver locket, placing it on the bedside table next to hers. They sat there, identical twin pieces of a broken past. 20 years ago, David began, his voice thick with emotion, there was a fire at the St. Jude's orphanage. I was trapped under a beam. Everyone ran. The teachers, the staff, they all ran, except for one girl, a girl with a compass around her neck, who dragged me out, who took a piece of falling glass at the forehead to save me. He turned to face her, tears shining in his eyes. "I looked for you for years, Delilah. I thought you were gone. When I saw the locket in your bag, I didn't want to believe it, because I had treated you so badly. I hated myself for hurting the one person who saved me." Delilah picked up the locket, her fingers trembling as the memories flooded back. The smoke, the heat, the terrified boy she refused to leave behind. "It was you," she whispered, "the boy with the sad eyes." She stood up, crossing the room to him. "You didn't owe me anything, David," she said, placing a hand on his cheek. "You saved me back. We're even."
David shook his head, covering her hand with his. "Not even close," he said, leaning in. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying you back, starting now." He kissed her, not with desperation this time, but with a promise, a slow, deep kiss that sealed their future. 6 months later, the skyline of New York City had changed. The Helix Tower stood tall and gleaming, a testament to modern engineering and bold design. In the penthouse office of the newly formed Jones and Kim architecture firm, Delilah stood looking out at the city she had conquered. She wasn't wearing a borrowed dress anymore. She was wearing a custom cream suit, her hair flowing free, the scar on her forehead visible and proud. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Jones," her assistant said, "the board is ready for you." Delilah walked into the conference room. The long table was filled with old men in gray suits, the same men who had mocked her, the same men who had wanted her fired. At the head of the table sat David. He stood up as she entered, pulling out the chair at the other end, the co-CEO's chair. "Gentlemen," David announced, his voice ringing with pride, "I believe you all know my wife, the lead architect of our most successful project in history." Delilah sat down, placing her portfolio on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," she flashed a smile that was equal parts charm and steel. "Let's talk about the future." Later, that evening on the balcony of their home, Grandma Kim sat holding a meeting needle, beaming at a sonogram picture resting on the table. "I knew it," Grandma cackled, sipping her tea. "I knew the morning sickness wasn't a lie. It was just early." David and Delilah stood by the railing, watching the sunset paint the Hudson River in gold and purple. David wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "So," he whispered, "are we going to tell her the first morning sickness was just hunger?" Delilah laughed, leaning back into him. "Let her have her victory," she said. "She did get us together after all." David turned her around, lifting her chin to look into her eyes. "No," he said softly, "fate got us together. She just nudged us." He kissed her forehead, right on the scar. "I love you, Delilah Jones. I love you, David Kim." As they kissed, the camera panned out over the city, over the Helix Tower rising high and strong, built on a foundation of truth, holding the sky up with grace.